Hi, my beautiful family. I am your brother, Mr. Peter. May the Heavenly Father, who holds the stars in his hands, hold each of you in his mercy. May he bless every woman here, our mothers, sisters, and daughters, with dignity, strength, and joy that no one can take away. May he guide every man in this family to love without pride, to protect without fear, and to honor the women beside them. May he place light in the path of every child, wisdom in the hearts of every youth, and peace in the souls of our elders. May he heal what is broken, provide where there is lack, and turn every silent prayer into a living miracle. Amen. My family, you are the reason I never give up. Every story I tell carries my heart, my effort, and my sleepless nights, because your happiness is my reward. When you watch until the end, you don't just enjoy a story, you give life to this family. To my new family members, you are no longer guests, you are part of this home. Stay, and you will see this is not just a channel, it is love, trust, and unity. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. The golden light of a California sunset had never looked more beautiful than when it kissed Amalia Whitfield's dark skin as she moved through their Beverly Hills garden party like a queen among mortals. At 38, Trey Whitfield possessed everything a man could desire: a $50 million investment empire, a mansion that graced Architectural Digest covers, and a wife so breathtaking that senators stammered when she smiled. Amalia, 32, was his masterpiece, a stunning blend of Hawaiian and African-American heritage who had sacrificed her thriving Honolulu marketing boutique to become his perfect partner. She wore a flowing coral silk dress that complemented her natural radiance, moving with oceanic grace among their elite guests. Senator Davidson approached with obvious admiration. Your wife is absolutely magnificent, Trey. How did a rough businessman like you win such an extraordinary woman? The question ignited fierce pride in Trey's chest as he watched Amalia effortlessly transition from discussing portfolio strategies with Japanese executives to charming their wives with authentic Hawaiian stories. What neither man knew was that this perfect evening would be their last moment of untainted happiness, the final sunset before Trey's pride began its systematic destruction of everything beautiful in their world. Trey pulled Amalia close as she glided back to his side, inhaling her signature plumeria fragrance that reminded him daily of the paradise she'd left for him. I swore I'd never be like my father, he declared to their assembled guests, his voice thick with conviction. He treated my mother like expensive furniture, beautiful but silent, decorative but disposable. I promised myself I'd cherish my wife, respect her intelligence, make her feel like the goddess she truly is. Amalia's smile was radiant as she squeezed his hand, her wedding rings catching the dying light like promises made in gold and diamonds. Trey rebuilt himself from nothing after his father's investment firm collapsed, she told Senator Davidson with obvious pride. He could have followed the same cold, ruthless path, but he chose love and integrity instead. The evening continued, in perfect harmony, orchestrated by Amalia's invisible expertise. She remembered every guest's personal details from previous gatherings, Mrs. Chen's daughter's wedding plans, and her concerns about finding the perfect venue that would honor both Chinese traditions and American customs. Ambassador Rodriguez's worries about his son's military deployment to a particularly dangerous region, and his pride in the young man's dedication to service. The Italian consul's wife's charity work with homeless veterans and her innovative approaches to providing both shelter and job training. Her genuine interest transformed business networking into human connection, resulting in 3 major deals sealed with handshakes and promises of family dinners where spouses and children would be welcomed as extensions of professional relationships. The Transformation she created in their social gatherings was remarkable to observe. Business rivals found themselves discovering common ground over shared concerns about their children's education. Competing investors identified collaboration opportunities while discussing their mutual passion for environmental conservation. Cultural differences dissolved as she helped guests recognize their shared values and complementary strengths, building bridges that extended far beyond individual transactions to create lasting partnerships based on trust and mutual respect. During cocktails, Amalia guided Senator Davidson's wife through her son's college struggles with the wisdom of someone who genuinely understood the challenges facing young people in competitive academic environments. She listened with authentic compassion as Mrs. Davidson described her fears about her son's anxiety and depression, offering practical advice born from her own experience mentoring young entrepreneurs in Hawaii who had faced similar pressures. Her suggestions about finding the right balance between academic achievement and emotional well-being resonated deeply with a mother desperate for guidance from someone who clearly understood both success and its psychological costs. She switched seamlessly to conversational Japanese with the executives' wives, a skill she'd mastered as a surprise for Trey's Pacific expansion plans. Spending months studying with a private tutor and practicing with native speakers until her pronunciation was flawless. The wives were delighted by her efforts to communicate in their language, sharing stories about their children's achievements and their own careers that they rarely discussed with American business associates. Through her genuine interest and cultural sensitivity, she transformed what could have been awkward social obligations into meaningful cross-cultural friendships that would benefit Trey's business relationships for years to come. Every interaction revealed her depth, intelligence, and genuine care for others that went far beyond social politeness. She remembered personal details that most people forgot within minutes of introduction. The Italian consul's recovery from recent heart surgery, the tech mogul's daughter's acceptance to veterinary school, the ambassador's wife's innovative literacy program for refugee children. Her ability to make each person feel truly seen and valued created loyalty that extended far beyond business transactions to encompass genuine personal affection and respect. Trey watched his wife work the crowd like a master artist, painting connections and opportunities with her natural charisma. Patricia Henley, Jake's wife and senior partner at Morrison & Associates, pulled him aside. "You're the luckiest man in California," she said earnestly. "Amalia doesn't just support your success, she amplifies it." The Japanese deal tonight? That happened because she spent weeks learning about their cultural preferences and family values. As the evening wound down, Trey overheard fragments of guest conversations filled with praise for both the event and its hostess. "Absolute perfection," the mayor's wife declared. "Every detail thoughtful and sophisticated." An art gallery owner mentioned commissioning Amalia to plan his next exhibition opening. A tech mogul's spouse asked for Amalia's advice on relocating their family from San Francisco. When the last guest departed at midnight, Trey found Amalia on their bedroom balcony, barefoot and ethereal against the city lights twinkling below. Like fallen stars, she'd removed her jewelry, letting her natural hair fall in soft waves around her shoulders, transforming from society hostess back into the woman who made his heart race every day. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, feeling her warmth through silk. "Your business in Hawaii? The independence you gave up for us?" The question revealed subconscious guilt, though he didn't recognize the warning signs flashing. In his own words, Amalia leaned into his embrace, her voice soft as tropical rain. "I have everything I've ever wanted right here, Trey. Your success is our success. Your happiness is mine. We're building something beautiful together, a legacy that will outlast us both." Her faith was absolute, her devotion complete, her sacrifice willing and joyful. Their lovemaking was passionate and tender, filled with whispered endearments and shared dreams. Trey traced her elegant collarbone, marveled at skin that seemed to glow in moonlight, worshipped every curve of the body that had chosen him above all others. Amalia responded with fire that had captured his heart, her love expressed in touches that branded him as surely as his ring marked her as his own. As she slept peacefully afterward, breathing steady and trusting, Trey felt the profound contentment of complete success. True love combined with unlimited prosperity. He memorized her peaceful expression, the shadow of lashes on cheekbones, the gentle rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. Tomorrow would bring business challenges, but tonight, with Amalia warm and safe in his arms, he felt invincible. Little did he know that his own insecurities would soon awaken a sleeping lioness, a woman whose strength, once tested, would prove more formidable than any force he had ever encountered in business or in life. Chapter 2: The First Crack. The financial reports scattered across Trey's mahogany desk seemed to mock him with their declining numbers, each page a testament to how Silicon Valley's young tech moguls were revolutionizing investment strategies, while he clung to his father's 20-year-old playbook. At 6:30, on a fog-shrouded Los Angeles morning, Trey felt every day of his 38 years weighing on his shoulders like lead blankets. The Nakamura account was threatening to jump ship to a startup run by someone barely old enough to shave. The Morrison portfolio expressed concerns about his traditional approach in an innovative marketplace. Even his most loyal clients were asking uncomfortable questions about modernization and artificial intelligence integration that made his expertise feel antiquated. The tech revolution wasn't just changing his industry, it was making him obsolete. Algorithms now predicted market trends faster than his decades of experience. Cryptocurrency speculation generated more excitement than his carefully researched blue-chip recommendations. Young entrepreneurs with Harvard MBAs and Silicon Valley connections were stealing clients who had once considered him irreplaceable. But this morning, her gentle presence felt like salt in the wounds of his professional insecurities, and something toxic began its first whisper in his mind. Amalia appeared in his office doorway like a vision of grace, carrying his favorite Kona coffee in the hand-painted mug she'd brought from Hawaii during their honeymoon. Her silk robe revealed elegant shoulders that had once driven him to distraction with their perfect curves, and her natural hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized striking cheekbones inherited from her Hawaiian grandmother. Even without makeup at dawn, she was breathtaking, radiating the peaceful energy that usually calmed his worst storms and restored his perspective on what truly mattered in their shared life. The coffee she prepared was perfect as always, the exact temperature he preferred, sweetened with the raw honey he'd discovered during their visit to her family's farm on Maui, served in the mug that represented their connection to her cultural heritage. She had risen early to prepare it exactly as he liked, another small act of devotion in an endless series of thoughtful gestures that he had begun taking for granted as his business pressures mounted and his appreciation for her efforts diminished. "You've been here since 4, she said softly, setting the coffee precisely where he preferred and beginning to massage his tense shoulders with skilled fingers. "The Nakamura presentation can wait until after breakfast. You need rest, not stress." Her touch was loving, her voice concerned, her intention purely supportive. She had no way of knowing that her innocent suggestion would trigger the first crack in their perfect marriage. The words hit him like a match to gasoline. "Wait!" Trey's voice exploded with exhaustion and fury, startling them both with its venom. "These 20-something tech kids are demolishing my market share while I sleep, and you want me to wait? You've never built anything from nothing, Amalia. Don't." Lecture me about business when you gave up your boutique to play housewife. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with the electricity of a marriage's first real wound. Amalia's hands stilled on his shoulders, and when he turned, he saw something he'd never witnessed before. Genuine hurt flickering across her normally serene features like shadows across water. But she didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't storm out dramatically. Instead, she absorbed the cruelty with heartbreaking dignity. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor he should have noticed. "I'll leave you to your important work." The way she emphasized important carried no sarcasm, only the quiet acknowledgement of a woman learning exactly where she stood in her husband's priorities. Throughout the day, Amalia moved through their mansion like a ghost of her former self. She prepared his meals without her usual cheerful commentary about ingredients sourced from favorite vendors or stories about the recipe's origins in her family history. The elaborate lunch she typically crafted, featuring seasonal produce from the Santa Monica Farmers Market, artisanal breads from their favorite bakery, carefully paired wines that complemented each dish, was reduced to simple sandwiches placed silently on his desk. She arranged his schedule without the personal touches that made his business relationships warm. No more handwritten notes in clients' preferred languages, no more remembering their children's achievements or anniversaries, no more thoughtful gifts that arrived at precisely the right moments to cement important partnerships. The silence in their home was deafening in its departure from their previous routine. Where once their kitchen had been filled with Amalia's humming as she prepared meals while discussing her day, now only the mechanical sounds of appliances marked the passage of time. The fresh flowers she typically arranged throughout their home remained wilted in their vases, a visible symbol of the beauty slowly dying in their relationship. Trey, buried in financial projections and competitor analysis, barely noticed the change initially. He was too consumed with the growing realization that his traditional investment strategies were becoming obsolete in a world of algorithmic trading and cryptocurrency speculation. The young entrepreneurs weren't just challenging his methods, they were making them irrelevant, forcing him to confront the possibility that everything he thought he understood about business was becoming as outdated as his father's approaches had been. His anxiety manifested in obsessive research sessions that stretched deep into the night. He studied fintech startups, analyzed blockchain technologies, and read countless articles about artificial intelligence disrupting traditional finance. Yet the more he learned, the further behind he felt. The gap between his experience and the new paradigm seemed to widen with each passing day. That evening, as they dressed for the Morrison Foundation charity gala, his business partner, Jake Henley, called with gossip that would prove prophetic in ways neither man could imagine. "You'll never guess who I saw at the Ritz-Carlton auction yesterday," Jake said with obvious excitement that penetrated even Trey's distracted state. "Catalina Shaw. Remember your ex from Harvard Business School? She looked absolutely stunning. Apparently, she's made quite a name for herself in venture capital. Successfully funded 3 major tech startups this year alone, including that artificial intelligence company that just went public for $2 billion. The mention of Catalina's business success hit Trey like an electric shock, reminding him of capabilities he had once found intimidating and thrilling in equal measure. During their relationship at Harvard, she had possessed an analytical brilliance that had both attracted and challenged him, forcing him to elevate his own thinking to match her intellectual standards. Her departure for New York had left him feeling simultaneously relieved and diminished, as if he had lost both a lover and a worthy opponent in the chess game of business strategy. Trey felt his pulse quicken at mention of his former flame, dormant feelings stirring with unexpected intensity. Catalina Shaw, now 35, had been his obsession before Amalia, brilliant, ambitious, and devastatingly beautiful, with icy confidence that had both attracted and intimidated him in ways that still influenced his reactions to successful women. Their relationship had ended when she chose a lucrative New York opportunity over building a life with him, but her memory still carried electric charge that he had thought marriage to Amalia had safely neutralized. "She asked about you. Actually," Jake continued, oblivious to the minefield he was navigating, "wondered if you were still doing traditional portfolio management, or if you'd evolved into more innovative investment strategies. I got the impression she might be interested in collaboration. Her firm specializes in exactly the kind of tech integration you've been struggling with." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was Catalina, thriving in the exact arena where he was failing, offering the kind of modern expertise that could resurrect his struggling firm. She represented everything he felt he was lacking: cutting-edge knowledge, innovative thinking, the ability to navigate the new economy with confidence rather than desperation. Amalia emerged from their walk-in closet wearing a stunning black evening gown, her jewelry simple but elegant, her natural beauty requiring no enhancement. Yet for the first time in their 3-year marriage, Trey found himself wondering what Catalina looked like now, whether success had made her even more alluring, whether her business acumen might be exactly what his struggling firm needed. At the gala, Amalia was gracious as always, but Trey caught her watching him with new wariness. She noticed his distraction when prominent donors approached, his lack of engagement during the speeches that usually held his attention, his tendency to scan the crowd as if searching for someone specific. When she excused herself to powder her nose, he found himself hoping and dreading he might see familiar blonde hair among the elite gathering. The contrast between his wife's social grace and his growing professional insecurities created a cognitive dissonance that he resolved by diminishing her contributions. Where once he had admired her ability to remember personal details about business associates, now he saw it as superficial small talk. Where once he had valued her cultural sensitivity and international dealings, now he questioned whether she understood real business strategy. The drive home was silent, except for his Bentley's purring engine. As they undressed for bed, Amalia finally spoke. "Jake mentioned Catalina Shaw tonight." Her voice held no accusation, only quiet observation tinged with something that might have been resignation. Trey's hand stilled on his cufflinks, caught off guard by her directness. Did he? The question came out more defensive than he'd intended, revealing guilt he didn't fully understand yet. "She was your great love before me, wasn't she?" Amalia's reflection in their bedroom mirror showed a woman steeling herself for truth she didn't want to hear. "You're my great love," he said, and in that moment, meant it completely. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Some invisible foundation had developed its first hairline crack. The perfect marriage was beginning its slow, inexorable collapse. As they lay in bed, Trey stared at the ceiling while Amalia's breathing gradually deepened into sleep. For the first time since their wedding, he felt the weight of unspoken dissatisfaction pressing against his chest. The woman beside him represented stability, comfort, unconditional love, but she also represented the traditional world he was failing to navigate successfully. Catalina, meanwhile, embodied innovation, challenge, the kind of cutting-edge thinking that might save his career. The comparison was unfair, he knew, but fairness had little to do with the fantasies beginning to take root in his troubled mind. That night, as Amalia lay sleepless beside him, she wondered if the man who had sworn never to be like his father, was already following the same destructive path, and whether her love would be strong enough to survive the transformation she could feel beginning in the man whose heart had once belonged entirely to her. Chapter 3. Poison Takes Root. 6 weeks later, the poison of discontent had spread through Trey's mind like ink through water, staining every interaction with his wife in shades of dissatisfaction he'd never noticed before, transforming his greatest blessing into his daily frustration. The morning sun, streaming through their breakfast nook windows, illuminated Amalia's natural beauty as she read the Los Angeles Times. But instead of admiring her, Trey found himself cataloguing perceived flaws. Why didn't she read the Wall Street Journal like Patricia Henley? When had she become so passive, so content with domestic routine instead of professional ambition? The questions felt reasonable in his stressed mind, though they revealed the growing cancer of his discontent. Patricia looked incredible at the Rothschild dinner last night, he said, stirring his coffee with unnecessary force. That promotion to senior partner at Morrison & Associates really suits her. There's something attractive about a woman with real ambition, don't you think? The words were designed to wound, though he told himself he was merely making conversation. Amalia's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her newspaper, and something died a little more in her eyes, the light that had once made senators forget their speeches and business moguls stumble over their words. Patricia is very accomplished, Amalia replied steadily, her voice betraying nothing of the pain blooming in her chest. Her environmental law work has helped preserve 3 major coastal areas. It's admirable how she balances such demanding career responsibilities with supporting Jake's business expansion. Even while being attacked, she found grace in acknowledging another woman's achievements. Admirable, Trey repeated, loading the word with mockery he pretended was unintentional. When was the last time anyone used that word about you? I mean, what exactly do you do all day while I'm building our future? While I'm fighting to keep us relevant in a changing marketplace? The cruelty was breathtaking in its casual delivery, designed to make her question her own worth. The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Amalia had spent yesterday coordinating every detail of his mother's 70th birthday party, securing the private dining room at Spago, arranging for the jazz quartet Margaret Whitfield had mentioned loving decades ago, commissioning a portrait artist to paint 3 generations of Whitfield women. She had also managed their housekeeper Maria's family emergency, covering her salary during her son's hospitalization while finding temporary replacement staff. Additionally, she'd researched sustainable energy investment opportunities, preparing a detailed presentation she'd planned to discuss with Trey when his mood improved. Instead of defending herself, she folded her newspaper with precise movements that betrayed none of her inner turmoil. "I support your success in whatever ways you need," she said simply. "I thought that mattered to our marriage." The word marriage carried weight, a reminder of what their relationship had once been, before it became a battleground for his insecurities and her diminishing sense of self-worth. But Trey was beyond hearing the grace in her response. The pressure from younger competitors, whispered rumors about his firm being old-fashioned, and growing fantasy of what his life might have been with someone like Catalina had created a perfect storm of resentment. He'd convinced himself that Amalia's contentment was actually complacency, her devotion was dependence, her sacrifice was lack of personal drive. The attacks became daily occurrences, each one carefully crafted to chip away at her confidence while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. He criticized her outfit choices before important events. "Are you sure that dress projects the right image for tonight's donors? Patricia always seems so polished at these functions. Maybe something more authoritative?" He dismissed her opinions, During dinner parties, Amalia doesn't follow financial news closely enough to have informed perspectives on market volatility. She's more focused on domestic concerns. He compared her unfavorably to other wives with surgical precision. Diana Morrison's networking abilities really impressed the Japanese investors. She secured 3 meetings for Senator Morrison just through casual conversation. That's the kind of business partnership I need. Each criticism was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had convinced himself that his attacks were constructive feedback rather than calculated emotional abuse. He had become expert at finding her vulnerabilities and exploiting them under the guise of helpful suggestions, transforming every social interaction into an opportunity to undermine her confidence while making himself appear supportive to outside observers. The public nature of his criticisms added humiliation to the injury, ensuring that their friends and associates witnessed her gradual diminishment. Yet through every verbal assault, Amalia never broke or retaliated with equal cruelty. She absorbed his attacks with the strength of ancient Hawaiian volcanoes, transforming pain into fuel for impossible perfection that became both her shield and her prison. Their home became a showcase of her silent determination, every meal a culinary masterpiece, featuring ingredients researched and sourced with obsessive care from vendors who had learned to expect her exacting standards. Every social event flawlessly orchestrated, down to personalized welcome gifts for each attendee that reflected hours of research into their personal interests and preferences. Every detail of their life polished to painful beauty that impressed guests while hollowing out her own soul. The irony was devastating in its cruel precision. The more perfectly she performed the role of ideal wife, the more Trey seemed to resent her capabilities and find fault with her efforts. Her success in managing their social calendar became evidence of superficiality rather than skill. Her ability to remember personal details about his business associates became manipulative calculation rather than genuine interest in other people. Her graceful handling of domestic crises became proof that she didn't understand real pressure rather than demonstration of her remarkable competence under stress. Their once warm conversations became professional exchanges devoid of emotional intimacy or personal connection. "Your dry cleaning is ready," replaced, "I missed you today and can't wait to hear about your meetings." The Hendersons confirmed. "Good Saturday," substituted, "I'm so excited for you to taste the dinner I planned around their dietary restrictions and cultural preferences." The woman who had once filled their home with laughter, music, and the joy of shared discoveries now moved through their mansion like an elegant ghost, her natural vivacity sacrificed on the altar of his inexplicable dissatisfaction and growing resentment. "You sound different," her sister Kalani observed during their weekly phone call, her voice tight with concern across the Pacific distance. "Empty. Like you're reading lines from a script instead of living your life." Kalani had been Amalia's closest confidant since childhood, the only person who could see through her perfect facade to the wounded woman beneath. "Marriage requires adaptation," Amalia replied carefully, watching Trey pace their living room, while screaming at someone about quarterly projections that were, ironically, the best his firm had produced in 2 years. "I'm learning to be the wife Trey needs during this difficult business period." But even as she spoke the words, she knew she wasn't adapting. She was disappearing piece by piece. The breaking point came during one particularly venomous evening when Trey's resentment finally found its most cutting expression. They were dressing for another obligatory social function when Amalia tentatively mentioned her interest in returning to work. "I've been thinking about perhaps starting a small consulting business," she said carefully, watching his reflection in their bedroom mirror. Interior design, maybe event planning, something modest that wouldn't interfere with supporting your career, but might help me feel more purposeful. Trey's reaction was swift and devastating. "You want to know what your problem is, Amalia?" he said, turning to face her with eyes that had gone cold as winter ocean. "You will never be like my ex, Catalina. She had real ambition, real drive, real business instincts that could actually contribute to a partnership. She understood that success requires sacrifice and intelligence, not just playing with color swatches and party favors like some bored housewife." The words hit their target with devastating precision. Amalia felt something inside her chest crack and break, not just from the cruelty of the comparison, but from the realization that he was holding up his manipulative, scheming ex-girlfriend as the standard she could never meet. The woman she had helped him see through, the woman who had nearly destroyed his business and his life, was apparently still the measuring stick by which he judged her worth. Catalina had vision, he continued, oblivious to the destruction he was causing with every word. She understood market dynamics, investment strategies, the kind of thinking that builds empires. You're content to arrange flowers and remember people's birthdays. That's not real work, Amalia. That's expensive hobby time for women who've never had to build anything that matters. The silence that followed was absolute and final. Amalia stood perfectly still, absorbing this latest blow with the same grace she had shown through months of systematic degradation, but something fundamental had shifted in her eyes. This wasn't just another attack on her capabilities. This was a declaration that she would always be found lacking when compared to the woman who had nearly destroyed everything he claimed to value. But she absorbed this latest blow without flinching, her spine straight as royal palm trees, her dignity intact despite the devastation blooming in her chest like a dark flower. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her soul. "I understand your perspective." That night, after Trey fell asleep, she stood on their balcony overlooking the glittering city and made a phone call to Hawaii. Her voice was quiet but resolute as she spoke in rapid pidgin Hawaiian to someone who clearly loved her unconditionally. The conversation was brief but decisive, punctuated by long silences that spoke volumes about pain being acknowledged and plans being formed. When she hung up, her expression had changed completely. For the first time in months, there was steel beneath the silk, fire beneath the grace. The woman who had been slowly disappearing was about to become the most dangerous version of herself, one with volcanic fury burning in her core and the strategic mind to channel it into devastating precision. As she watched the city lights blur through tears, she finally allowed herself to shed. Amalia Whitfield began planning the most important campaign of her life, the systematic reclamation of everything her husband had tried to destroy, starting with her dignity and ending with his complete understanding of exactly what he had chosen to lose, and how utterly wrong he had been about both her and his precious Catalina. Chapter 4. The Humiliation. The ballroom of the Century Plaza Hotel gleamed with crystalline elegance as Los Angeles's financial elite gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Whitfield Investments. But the real masterpiece was Amalia, moving through the crowd like a dark angel in midnight blue Valentino, orchestrating her husband's triumph even as he prepared to deliver her ultimate humiliation. The event represented the pinnacle of their social calendar, a gathering that would be discussed in business circles for months afterward and referenced in trade publications as an example of how successful firms celebrated their achievements while strengthening industry relationships. Every detail had been planned with obsessive precision that revealed Amalia's background in marketing and event management, skills that Trey had begun dismissing as frivolous, but which had actually been essential to their social and professional success. The ballroom's lighting had been adjusted to flatter both the aging patriarchs of old money and the young tech entrepreneurs who represented the future of California business. The sound system was calibrated perfectly to allow intimate conversation while ensuring that speeches would be audible throughout the space without becoming overwhelming. She had planned every detail of this evening with obsessive precision, the menu that showcased both comfort and sophistication, featuring dishes that honored 3 different cultural traditions represented among their key investors. The floral arrangements that whispered wealth rather than shouting it, incorporating rare orchids she'd personally selected at the flower district. The perfectly calculated seating chart that would facilitate major business deals while ensuring no personality conflicts disrupted the celebratory atmosphere. The guest list read like a who's who of California power, senators and tech moguls, entertainment industry royalty and old money dynasties, international investors and diplomatic families. Each invitation had been personally crafted by Amalia, written in multiple languages when appropriate, designed to make recipients feel specially chosen rather than merely invited to another corporate function. What none of these distinguished guests knew was that they were about to witness the public execution of a marriage, orchestrated by a man too blind to recognize the treasure he was destroying. Margaret Whitfield, Trey's 71-year-old mother, approached with genuine warmth, lighting her patrician features. "You've outdone yourself tonight, dear," she said, taking Amalia's arm with familiar affection. "This celebration is absolutely perfect. Every detail shows such thoughtfulness and care. Trey is the luckiest man in California to have you as his partner." The elder Mrs. Whitfield possessed old money grace that commanded respect, and her approval meant everything in their social circle. Before Amalia could respond, the hotel's events manager appeared with urgent whispers about a kitchen crisis. The main course preparation had been delayed by equipment failure, threatening to derail the carefully timed evening. As she excused herself to handle the emergency, a routine part of being the perfect hostess, Amalia caught fragments of conversation from Trey's circle, where Jake Henley was regaling listeners with stories about a recent business conference that inevitably led to mentions of Catalina Shaw. "Brilliant woman," she heard Jake saying with obvious admiration. "Her venture capital firm has revolutionized tech startup funding, makes traditional investment strategies look positively medieval. I keep telling Trey he should consider collaboration opportunities." The words felt like prophecy, though Amalia couldn't know how accurate that instinct would prove. 20 minutes later, having resolved the catering crisis with characteristic efficiency and grace, Amalia returned to find Trey's extended family gathered around their reserved table. His brother Marcus and sister-in-law Diana, his cousins from San Francisco, several close family friends, all people who had watched her transformation from glowing bride to increasingly silent shadow over the past months. Their faces showed concern that matched her inner turmoil. The main course was served with renewed perfection, accompanied by wine pairings Amalia had researched extensively to complement each dish while honoring different cultural preferences. Conversation flowed smoothly until Margaret encouraged her to share family stories, knowing how beautifully Amalia honored her Hawaiian heritage through storytelling. "Tell them about your grandmother, dear," Margaret prompted warmly. "The story about how she built her catering empire from nothing in post-war Honolulu. Such an inspiring example of female entrepreneurship and resilience." The suggestion was meant kindly, an opportunity for Amalia to shine in the way that had once made Trey so proud of his brilliant wife. Amalia's face softened as she began the tale that had always defined her sense of possibility and strength. Tutu Leilani arrived in Hawaii with nothing but recipes written on scraps of paper and determination to feed her family with dignity, she said, her voice warming with genuine love and pride. She started by selling malasadas on street corners. At dawn, saving every penny until she could afford a food cart. Within 10 years, she was catering the governor's mansion and employing 20 local women. The table listened with genuine interest as Amalia described her grandmother's wisdom, her resilience in the face of discrimination and economic hardship, her ability to transform simple ingredients into extraordinary experiences that brought communities together. For the first time in months, the vibrant storyteller emerged from behind her perfect facade, hands animated, voice rich with passion and longing for the strength her grandmother had embodied. The nearby tables had quieted, to listen, drawn by the authentic emotion in her voice and the compelling story of immigrant determination. Even the waitstaff paused in their duties, captivated by this glimpse of the real woman behind the polished society wife exterior. This was the Amalia who had captured Trey's heart, brilliant, passionate, deeply connected to her roots and heritage. Then, Trey's voice cut through her narrative like a blade through silk, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. Amalia always romanticizes her past, he said with casual cruelty, his words carrying across nearby tables like shockwaves. It wasn't as picture-perfect as she makes it sound. Her family struggled with poverty, addiction, the usual island problems that tourists never see, but she likes to turn everything into fairy tales because reality doesn't sound as impressive to people in our social circle. The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Margaret Whitfield's face drained of colour, her mouth opening in shock at her son's public cruelty. Diana dropped her fork with a clatter that seemed to echo through the sudden hush. Marcus looked physically ill, while the San Francisco cousins exchanged horrified glances. Even strangers at neighboring tables had stopped their conversations, sensing the poison that had just contaminated the elegant atmosphere. Every eye in their section of the ballroom focused on Amalia, waiting to see how she would respond to being publicly diminished and humiliated by the man who had sworn to cherish and protect her. The moment stretched like eternity, heavy with the weight of witnesses to marital destruction. Some guests looked away in embarrassment, others watched with the fascination of observers at a car accident. The humiliation burned through Amalia like liquid fire, searing away the last vestiges of her illusions about their marriage. But she had learned to transform pain into power, devastation into dignity. Her training in grace under pressure served her now in her darkest moment. "Of course, you're absolutely right," she said with devastating poise, her smile never wavering despite the destruction happening behind her eyes. "I do tend to see beauty where others might see only struggle. Excuse me while I check on the dessert service. I want everything to remain absolutely perfect for your special evening, darling." The endearment carried subtle venom that only the most perceptive guests detected. She rose with fluid elegance, her dignity intact despite the mortification burning in her chest like acid. As she walked away, every step measured and graceful, she heard Margaret Whitfield's voice cutting through the awkward silence like winter wind. "Trenton James Whitfield, what has become of you? What kind of man destroys his wife in public?" In Chantilly, the privacy of the hotel's executive bathroom, Amalia finally allowed herself a moment of raw truth that she had been denying for months. She looked at her reflection in the ornate mirror, still beautiful despite the stress that had carved subtle lines around her eyes, still perfectly composed despite the humiliation burning in her chest like acid, but hollow-eyed in a way that no amount of makeup could conceal or designer clothing could disguise. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, a ghost of the vibrant entrepreneur who had once commanded rooms with her presence and intelligence, who had built successful businesses and inspired loyalty through authentic leadership rather than performative perfection. The transformation was shocking in its completeness. 3 years ago, she had been featured on magazine covers as an example of young entrepreneurial success. Business leaders had sought her advice on cultural marketing and authentic brand development. She had been invited to speak at conferences, consulted on major resort developments, recognized by chambers of commerce across the Pacific as an innovative voice in sustainable tourism. Now she was reduced to hiding in hotel bathrooms, trying to find remnants of the woman she had been before she sacrificed her identity on the altar of someone else's ego and insecurities. She removed her phone from her small evening clutch with hands that trembled slightly despite her outward composure, and made 2 calls that would change everything about both their lives. The first was to Hawaii, speaking rapidly in Pidgin Hawaiian to someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment, her sister Kalani, who had been begging her to come home for months and who had prepared everything necessary for her sister's liberation from a marriage that was killing her spirit. The second was to a number she had memorized months ago, but never dialed, knowing that using it would mean crossing a line from which there could be no return to the life she had known. When she returned to the ballroom 15 minutes later, her smile was different, not the practiced perfection of a society wife, but something sharper, more knowing, infinitely more dangerous. The woman who had spent 3 years absorbing her husband's cruelty like a sponge was about to become a force of nature that would reshape both their lives forever. The evening continued with forced normalcy, but those who truly knew her noticed the fundamental change in Amalia's energy. There was something final in her posture, something irreversible in the way she watched Trey laugh with his business associates, completely oblivious to the earthquake building beneath his feet and the reckoning that would soon shake his world to its very foundations. Chapter 5. The Revelation. The morning after the anniversary disaster arrived, gray and overcast. Los Angeles shrouded in marine layer that matched the storm building in Amalia's soul as she prepared Trey's breakfast with the mechanical precision of a woman who had already begun her systematic detachment from the life that no longer served her. Trey sat at their kitchen island, scrolling through his phone, completely ignoring the gourmet spread she had arranged. Fresh tropical fruit carved into artistic displays, homemade Portuguese malasadas that had taken her 3 hours to perfect. Kona coffee imported weekly from Hawaii at considerable expense. His indifference to her efforts had become so routine that he no longer bothered with even perfunctory appreciation. The morning light filtering through their floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated the expensive marble countertops and custom cabinetry that had once represented their shared dreams of domestic perfection. "The Morrison account signed this morning," he said without looking up, his tone casual, as if his public humiliation of her 12 hours earlier had been nothing more than a minor social misstep. "Jake thinks we should celebrate at Nobu tonight. Apparently, Catalina Shaw will be joining us. She's interested in discussing potential collaboration opportunities." The name dropped like a stone into still water, creating ripples neither of them fully understood yet. His fingers continued scrolling through emails with the same distracted energy that had characterized their interactions for months. The mention of his ex-girlfriend's name sent a familiar chill through Amalia's carefully controlled composure, but she had learned to transform every emotion into fuel for strategic thinking. Her movements remained fluid and precise as she arranged his breakfast plate, though every gesture was performed with the detached efficiency of someone who had already begun mourning the death of their marriage. What Trey didn't realize was that his wife had spent the dark hours before dawn making preparations that would expose every lie, every betrayal, and every carefully hidden truth that threatened to destroy their marriage. starting with the real reason Catalina Shaw had suddenly reappeared in their lives. Amalia placed his coffee exactly 2 inches from his right hand, as she had every morning for 3 years of increasingly thankless marriage. "That's wonderful news about Morrison," she replied, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever, though her pulse quickened at the mention of his ex-girlfriend. "Congratulations on closing such an important deal." The words were perfect, supportive, empty of any genuine emotion. For the first time in weeks, Trey actually looked at his wife with focused attention. Something in her stillness penetrated his self-absorption, a quality he couldn't quite identify, but that made the hair on his neck stand up with primitive warning. She moved with the same fluid grace, wore the same elegant silk robe, but there was something fundamentally different about her presence, like the calm before a hurricane. "Are you feeling well?" he asked, genuine concern creeping into his voice for the first time in months. "You seem different, distant." He sat down, his phone finally giving her his complete attention, though far too late to matter. The damage to their marriage had already passed the point of repair, and Amalia had moved beyond forgiveness into the realm of strategic planning. Before she could respond, her phone rang with perfect timing that felt like destiny. She glanced at the screen, and for a split second her composed mask slipped, revealing something that might have been satisfaction mixed with grim determination. Then unexpectedly she laughed, a sound so foreign after months of careful silence that it made Trey look up sharply from his coffee. It wasn't the warm laughter he remembered from their early marriage, but something sharper, more knowing, infinitely more dangerous. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying an undertone of anticipation that should have warned him of what was coming. "This is the call I've been waiting for." She stepped into the adjacent sitting room to take the conversation that would change both their lives forever. Trey could hear her voice through the doorway, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone who was clearly not a casual acquaintance. The conversation was conducted partially in English and partially in rapid Hawaiian pidgin, suggesting the caller was someone from her past, someone who knew her before she became Mrs. Whitfield. When she returned 5 minutes later, she carried her phone and an expression of absolute resolve that made him instinctively step backward. "Trey," she said, her voice steady as ancient mountains and twice as immovable, "I need to show you something that will change everything you think you know about our marriage, your business, and the woman you've been secretly meeting with for the past 2 months." The words hit him like physical blows, each one precisely aimed to maximum psychological impact. She placed her phone on the marble counter between them and pressed the speaker button with deliberate ceremony, as if unveiling a masterpiece she had spent months perfecting. A man's voice emerged, cultured and confident, with a slight East Coast accent that suggested years of courtroom testimony and professional authority. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is Detective Marcus Chen from the Los Angeles Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. As we discussed, I'm prepared to share the evidence you requested regarding Catalina Shaw's activities targeting married businessmen in the Beverly Hills area." The detective's voice carried the weight of official investigation, each word carefully chosen to maximize impact while maintaining legal precision. Trey's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as the implications of what he was hearing began to penetrate his shock. This wasn't a casual conversation between strangers. This was the culmination of months of systematic investigation that his wife had conducted, while he believed her to be nothing more than a decorative household accessory. Trey's face went white as paper. "Amalia, what is this? What are you? How do you know about—" His protests died as the detective continued speaking, laying out a pattern of systematic seduction and financial manipulation that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Miss Shaw has been under surveillance for 18 months as part of a broader investigation into sophisticated romance fraud targeting high-net-worth individuals, Detective Chen explained with professional detachment. Her method involves extensive research into her, targets business vulnerabilities and personal relationships before initiating contact. She typically approaches married men during periods of professional stress, offering both romantic and business partnerships designed to extract maximum financial benefit before disappearing. The phone call continued for another 10 minutes, devastating in its clinical precision. Catalina had affairs with no fewer than 6 married businessmen over the past 3 years, extracting a total of $2.8 million through various investment schemes and business partnerships that existed only on paper. She had been feeding confidential business information to Trey's competitors while simultaneously seducing him away from his wife and his moral center. The evidence includes recorded phone conversations, financial transactions, and testimonies from previous victims, the detective concluded. Miss Shaw's current target appears to be your husband, Mr. Whitfield. She has been systematically undermining his marriage while positioning herself as both romantic and business salvation. We believe she's preparing to propose a major investment opportunity that would give her access to his client accounts. When the call ended, silence filled their kitchen like toxic gas that threatened to suffocate any remaining pretense of marital harmony. Trey stared at his wife with newfound understanding and growing horror at the depth of his betrayal and blindness. Amalia had known about his emotional affair, his secret meetings with Catalina, his growing dissatisfaction with their marriage. And instead of confronting him with tears and accusations like the emotionally unstable woman he had convinced himself she had methodically built a legal case that exposed everything while protecting herself from both financial ruin and public humiliation. The revelation of her strategic thinking was almost as devastating as the exposure of his infidelity. This was not the simple housewife he had been dismissing for months, but a formidable opponent who had been several moves ahead of him throughout their entire marital collapse. She had anticipated his betrayal, prepared for his weakness, and positioned herself to emerge from their relationship's destruction with both her dignity and her financial security intact. The woman he had underestimated so completely had just demonstrated tactical brilliance that would have impressed military strategists and corporate takeover specialists. "How long have you known?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The successful businessman who commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors had been reduced to a frightened man facing the consequences of his betrayal. 3 months, Amalia replied calmly, though her eyes blazed with controlled fury. "Since the night you came home smelling like her perfume and started criticizing everything about our life together. I hired a private investigator the next morning because I knew my husband well enough to recognize when he was falling under someone else's influence." Her voice carried no accusation, only factual observation that cut deeper than any emotional outburst could have. She moved to their home office with fluid grace that revealed nothing of the emotional storm that must have been raging beneath. Her composed exterior returning with a thick manila folder that she placed on the counter, with the weight of evidence that would reshape his understanding of everything he thought he knew about both their marriage and his own character. Photos of your meetings with Catalina, copies of her communications with your competitors, financial records showing how she's been positioning herself to destroy your business while stealing your assets, and documentation of her previous victims and their testimonies, Everything you need to understand exactly how thoroughly you've been manipulated and how close you came to losing everything we built together." Trey opened the folder with trembling hands, seeing his own face in surveillance. Photos that documented his systematic betrayal of everything he had once claimed to value. In image after image, he saw himself with Catalina, in restaurants where he had told Amalia he was attending business meetings, in hotel lobbies where he had claimed to be negotiating deals, in her upscale apartment where he had convinced himself. Their conversations were purely professional strategy sessions. Each photograph was time-stamped and annotated with details that revealed the depth of his deception and the thoroughness of Amalia's investigation. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial records showed unusual activity in accounts he thought were private. Phone records documented conversations at times when he had claimed to be working late. Credit card statements revealed purchases he had forgotten making in his excitement over clandestine meetings. His entire double life was laid out in clinical detail, transformed from thrilling secret romance into pathetic, middle-aged cliché. "I'm flying to Australia tomorrow," Amalia continued with devastating calm, her voice carrying the finality of someone who had moved beyond anger into the realm of strategic action. "My mother is ill and needs immediate surgery. I'll need $1 million transferred to my personal account for medical expenses and extended care arrangements." The wire transfer information is in that folder. She had already moved beyond explanation into the realm of non-negotiable demands. But the Australia story was a lie, and they both knew it. Trey had met her mother twice. A vibrant, healthy woman who ran a successful catering business and had no intention of needing her daughter's rescue. This was Amalia's exit strategy, carefully planned and flawlessly executed, giving her the resources to disappear from his life while maintaining her dignity. "Amalia, please," he began, reaching for her hand, but she stepped back as if his touch might contaminate her carefully constructed composure. "Don't," she said quietly, her voice carrying more finality than any shouting could have achieved. "You made your choice when you decided I wasn't worth protecting from your own dissatisfaction and weakness. You chose to blame me for problems I didn't create instead of working with me to solve them together. Now you get to live with the consequences, while I reclaim everything you tried to destroy." Her words were measured, precise, devastating in their accuracy, and completely devoid of the emotional chaos he had expected. She paused, her eyes meeting his with the kind of direct intensity that had once made him feel like the luckiest man alive, and now made him feel like the biggest fool who had ever lived. "And Trey, after you told me I would never be like your precious Catalina, after you held up a woman who was actively destroying our marriage as the standard I should aspire to meet, I realized that you were absolutely right. I will never be like her. I will never be a manipulative, scheming fraud who preys on weak men's insecurities. I will never be someone who destroys families for profit. I will never be someone who mistakes cruelty for strength or manipulation for intelligence." Her voice gained strength with each declaration, transforming from quiet observation into something approaching righteous fury. "You compared me to a criminal, Trey. You told me I was lacking because I wasn't enough like a woman who was literally stealing from you. That's when I knew our marriage was over, not because you were having an affair, but because your judgment had become so corrupted that you couldn't tell the difference between strength and manipulation, between love and exploitation, between a partner and a predator. The woman who had absorbed months of his criticism without breaking, who had maintained perfect composure through public humiliation, who had orchestrated elaborate social events while secretly building a legal case against his betrayal, was finally revealing the full extent of her strength. She wasn't the fragile flower he had convinced himself he was protecting through his lies. She was a formidable opponent, who had been several moves ahead of him throughout their entire marital collapse. As she walked upstairs to pack her carefully planned escape, Amalia left behind a man finally beginning to understand that his greatest treasure had always been the woman he had systematically destroyed, and that some betrayals create damage, too profound for any amount of remorse to repair, especially when the betrayal involves holding up everything good and honest as inferior to everything false and destructive. Chapter 6. The Departure. By noon the next day, Amalia Reeves had transformed back into herself, not Mrs. Whitfield, not the perfect society wife, not the woman who had spent 3 years absorbing emotional abuse with grace, but the powerful entrepreneur who had once commanded respect across the Pacific business community and was about to do so again. She moved through their Beverly Hills mansion one final time, collecting only what truly belonged to her, the jewelry from her family, photographs from her life before Trey, clothing that reflected her personal style rather than his preferences. Everything else, the designer dresses chosen to make him look successful, the art pieces selected for investment value, the furniture arranged to impress his associates, remained untouched as monuments to a life she was gladly abandoning. The process was both liberating and heartbreaking. The evening gowns that had once made her feel beautiful now seemed like costumes worn for someone else's performance. Only the items that connected her to her authentic self and cultural heritage seemed worth preserving. Her suitcases, vintage, Louis Vuitton pieces that had belonged to her grandmother, contained the carefully curated essence of who she had been before she lost herself in the role of perfect wife. Each item chosen represented a piece of her authentic identity. The vintage Aloha shirts that connected her to Hawaiian culture, the business suits that had once made her formidable in boardrooms, the books on marketing and entrepreneurship that revealed her true intellectual interests. Trey found her in their bedroom as she zipped the final case, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw genuine fear in his eyes, the terrifying recognition that he was about to lose the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. "Amalia, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying desperation she had never heard before. "The money transfer is complete, but please don't go, not like this. Let me explain what happened with Catalina. Let me show you how sorry I am. We can fix this." His words tumbled over each other with frantic energy, the composed businessman reduced to pleading. She turned to face him fully, and he saw a stranger looking back with eyes that held no warmth, no forgiveness, no remaining trace of the love that had once made him feel invincible. "There's nothing to fix," she said with calm finality. "You showed me exactly who you are when pressure tested your character. I'm simply responding appropriately to that information." The taxi arrived precisely on schedule, another detail she had orchestrated with military precision. As the driver loaded her luggage, Trey followed her to the front door like a man walking to his own execution, still trying to find words that might undo months of systematic cruelty and betrayal. "Where will you really go?" he asked quietly, abandoning the pretense that Australia had ever been her actual destination. "What will you do?" The questions revealed his growing understanding that he had never really known the woman he married. Her capabilities, her connections, her capacity for strategic thinking that rivaled any boardroom adversary he had ever faced. Amalia paused at the threshold of their home, looking back at the marble foyer where she had welcomed hundreds of guests, the crystal chandelier that had witnessed countless dinner parties orchestrated for his benefit, the life she had crafted around his needs and ambitions. "I'm going to build something beautiful," she said simply, "something that belongs entirely to me." The ride to LAX was silent, the driver respectfully avoiding conversation with a woman who radiated the kind of contained intensity that suggested profound life changes in motion. Amalia used the time to make phone calls that would reshape her future. Conversations with former clients who had been waiting years for her return to business. Discussions with Hawaiian real estate agents about properties she had been secretly researching. Arrangements with venture capitalists who remembered her innovative approaches to cultural tourism marketing and had never stopped hoping she would return to the industry. Her flight to Honolulu lifted off as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific, carrying her away from 3 years of diminished existence toward a future she would control completely. She had chosen a first-class seat by the window, wanting to watch Los Angeles shrink beneath her as symbolic of leaving behind the woman she had become in service of someone else's dreams. During the 5-hour flight, Amalia began sketching plans for the consulting firm she would establish, not the small business Trey had mocked, but a comprehensive cultural marketing agency that would work with resorts, tourism boards, and entertainment companies to authentically represent Pacific Islander culture while ensuring indigenous communities benefited directly. Her expertise in both business strategy and cultural sensitivity would make her indispensable in an industry hungry for authentic voices. Meanwhile, Trey sat in their empty mansion, discovering the true scope of what he had lost. Every room revealed evidence of Amalia's invisible contributions, detailed calendars tracking clients' personal preferences, comprehensive files on business opportunities she had researched, thank you notes from associates praising her grace and intelligence in multiple languages. His first business dinner alone was a disaster. He forgot the Japanese executives' dietary restrictions, failed to remember their children's names, and missed cultural cues that Amalia had always helped him navigate. The deal that should have been a formality collapsed into awkward silence and polite deferrals. Jake Henley, attending as witness to what should have been triumph, left early with obvious embarrassment. "Where's Amalia?" Mrs. Morrison asked during the Chamber of Commerce gala, her absence creating a void that no amount of business success could fill. "She always makes these events so much more enjoyable," the Cultural Heritage Committee specifically requested. Her involvement in planning the Pacific Arts Festival. Trey realized that his wife had built her own network of respect and admiration that existed independent of his financial influence. The loneliness was immediate and crushing. Their mansion, designed to showcase success and entertain important guests, felt like a mausoleum without Amalia's warmth to animate its expensive spaces. He found himself calling her phone repeatedly, listening to voicemail messages that had been disconnected, sending emails that bounced back undelivered. She had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the hollow echo of what their life had been before he destroyed it. 3 days after her departure, Margaret Whitfield arrived unannounced, her patrician composure barely containing maternal fury. "What have you done?" she demanded, standing in the foyer where Amalia had once greeted her with genuine affection and respect. "How did you become the kind of man who destroys the best thing in his life? How did you become exactly like your father anyway?" The comparison hit like a physical blow, accurate and devastating. But in Honolulu, Amalia was experiencing the profound relief of authentic existence for the first time in years. She woke in her suite at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel to trade winds and plumeria-scented air, her body remembering what it felt like to breathe without the constant tension of walking on eggshells around someone else's fragile ego. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman reclaiming her power, her joy, her fundamental sense of self-worth. That first week back in paradise, as she re-established connections with family and former colleagues who welcomed her return with open arms and celebration, Amalia realized that leaving Trey hadn't been the end of her story. It had been the beginning of the chapter where she finally became the heroine of her own life again. Chapter 7. The Awakening. 3 months after Amalia's departure, Trey Whitfield sat in his Beverly Hills mansion, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had once believed made him successful, finally understanding that his wife hadn't just been the perfect accessory to his achievements. She had been their architect, their foundation, and their most essential element. The evidence of his professional collapse surrounded him in neat piles of financial reports that told a story of systematic decline. The Morrison account had withdrawn after a disastrous presentation where he'd forgotten crucial details. Amalia had always managed. The Japanese partnership dissolved when he'd inadvertently insulted their cultural values during what should have been a routine courtesy meeting. 3 major clients had switched to younger, more innovative firms that offered exactly the kind of tech integration he'd been too proud to pursue. His business partner Jake Henley sat across from him in the home office, his expression grim as he delivered the latest round of devastating news. "The Nakamura Group officially terminated our contract this morning," Jake said, his voice heavy with disappointment and growing concern. They specifically mentioned the decline in personal attention and cultural sensitivity since Amalia left. Apparently, she used to send handwritten notes to Mrs. Nakamura in Japanese, remembering their grandchildren's birthdays and their daughter's wedding anniversary. The revelation hit Trey like a physical blow. His wife hadn't just been supporting his business success, she had been creating it through thousands of invisible acts of thoughtfulness and intelligence that he had dismissed as mere housewifery. "That's not all," Jake continued reluctantly, opening another folder that contained information Trey wasn't prepared to process. "Remember how excited I was about Catalina Shaw's business proposal, the one where she offered to modernize our investment strategies and introduce us to her network of tech entrepreneurs? Well, it turns out every single company in her portfolio is either bankrupt or under investigation for fraud. We would have lost everything within 6 months." The detectives' earlier warning about Catalina's systematic targeting of married businessmen now took on horrifying clarity. She had been preparing to destroy not just his marriage, but his entire financial empire, extracting maximum wealth while leaving him with nothing but debt and scandal. Only Amalia's investigation and timely exposure had saved him from complete professional ruin. His mother's weekly visits had become exercises in maternal disappointment that cut deeper than any business failure. Margaret Whitfield no longer bothered with social pleasantries, arriving with the stern purpose of forcing her son to confront his transformation into everything she had raised him not to become. "Your father was cruel to me for 30 years, she said during one particularly painful conversation, standing in the living room where Amalia had once hosted their family gatherings with such warmth and grace. Cold, dismissive, constantly comparing me to other women and finding me lacking. I stayed because divorce wasn't acceptable in our social circle then. But you, Trenton, you had genuine love, real partnership, a woman who sacrificed everything for your happiness. And you threw it away to become exactly like him anyway." The comparison to his father was accurate and devastating. Harold Whitfield had indeed treated his wife like expensive furniture, beautiful but essentially decorative, valuable but replaceable. Trey had watched his mother wither under that treatment, had sworn as a young man never to inflict such casual cruelty on anyone he claimed to love. Yet under pressure, he had defaulted to the exact same pattern of behavior, proving that character revealed itself most clearly during difficult times. Alone in their bedroom, now just his bedroom, Trey found evidence of Amalia's true worth in places he had never bothered to look. Her nightstand drawer contained detailed notes about his business associates' families, their interests, their anniversaries and achievements. She had been his secret weapon in every social and professional interaction, making him appear thoughtful and personally invested in ways that had built deep loyalty among his clients. Her home office revealed the full scope of what he had lost. Comprehensive market research on emerging investment opportunities in sustainable energy, detailed analyses of competitor strategies, innovative marketing proposals that could have positioned his firm as industry leaders rather than followers. Struggling to remain relevant, she had been developing solutions to every business challenge he faced, waiting for him to trust her judgment enough to listen to her insights. The social isolation was perhaps most crushing of all. Invitations that had once arrived regularly for the power couple now came addressed only to him, with pointed questions about Amalia's absence that he couldn't answer without revealing his role in their separation. Former friends avoided him at events, their disapproval palpable and deserved. He had become a cautionary tale about successful men who destroy their own happiness through hubris and ingratitude. Senator Davidson, once a close friend and business ally, cornered him at a charity event with brutal honesty. "What you did to that remarkable woman was unforgivable," he said quietly, his voice carrying decades of political authority. "Amalia made you better than you deserved to be, and you repaid her devotion with public humiliation. Men like you are exactly why exceptional women hesitate to sacrifice their independence for marriage." The Knights were worst of all. Their mansion, designed to showcase success and entertain distinguished guests, felt like a mausoleum without Amalia's presence to transform its expensive spaces into a warm home. He found himself calling her disconnected number repeatedly, composing emails he knew would never reach her, driving past places they had shared memories as if proximity to their past might somehow restore their future. His attempts to locate her had failed completely, despite employing 3 different private investigation firms and spending thousands of dollars on professional search services. Private investigators found no trace of Amalia Reeves in Australia or anywhere else their extensive resources could reach. She had disappeared as thoroughly as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the echoes of conversations that now revealed their profound wisdom and the absence of a love he had been too proud to value while he possessed it. Credit monitoring services showed no activity under her name. Social media searches yielded nothing. Even airline records seemed to have been systematically scrubbed of any trace of her departure. The thoroughness of her disappearance spoke to planning that must have taken months to execute perfectly. She had clearly prepared for this moment long before their final confrontation, establishing new identities and financial structures that would make tracking her impossible. The woman he had dismissed as unsophisticated in business matters had orchestrated the most complete vanishing act he had ever encountered, demonstrating strategic thinking that rivaled any corporate takeover he had witnessed in his professional career. One evening, while sorting through financial documents in preparation for quarterly tax filings, Trey discovered something that stopped his heart and forced him to confront the full magnitude of what he had destroyed through his arrogance and ingratitude. Hidden in Amalia's desk was a complete business plan for a cultural marketing consultancy that was brilliant in its scope and innovation, sophisticated in its financial projections, and revolutionary in its approach to ethical business development. She had been preparing to surprise him with a business partnership that would have revolutionized their shared financial future while addressing critical needs in the entertainment and tourism industries. The document was professionally formatted and thoroughly researched, with market analysis that rivaled reports produced by major consulting firms, financial projections that demonstrated both conservative and aggressive growth scenarios, and strategic partnerships already identified with major corporations seeking authentic cultural expertise. She had spent months developing this proposal, working late into the night while he slept, conducting research during the hours he dismissed as her free time, building something extraordinary while he criticized her for lacking professional ambition. The business model she had developed was genuinely innovative, addressing the growing demand for cultural authenticity in global marketing, while ensuring that indigenous communities benefited from their traditional knowledge rather than being exploited by it. Her approach combined profit generation with cultural preservation, creating sustainable economic opportunities that honored traditional values while meeting modern market demands. The projected revenue streams were substantial, with conservative estimates suggesting they could have doubled their household income within 3 years while establishing themselves as industry leaders in ethical cultural marketing. As he read her detailed projections and implementation timeline, Trey finally understood the full magnitude of his loss and his own blindness. He hadn't just destroyed his marriage through his cruelty and infidelity. He had obliterated their future, betrayed his best friend and most valuable business partner, and become the exact kind of man he had once despised. Her little hobby could have generated millions in revenue while positioning them as pioneers in an emerging field that combined their complementary skills perfectly. As he sat surrounded by the evidence of what could have been, Trey finally understood that losing Amalia hadn't just cost him a wife, it had robbed him of the partnership that could have transformed both their lives into something extraordinary, and that some betrayals destroy not just what was, but everything that could have been. Chapter 8. The Search. 2 years had passed since Amalia's departure when Trey Whitfield first saw her photograph in the business section of the Wall Street Journal, her radiant smile accompanying an article titled "Pacific Pioneer, How Amalia." Reeves built a cultural marketing empire from scratch and realized that losing her had been only the beginning of understanding what he had destroyed. The article revealed that his former wife had not spent the past 2 years nursing wounded feelings or struggling to rebuild her confidence. Instead, she had created something extraordinary, Kaimoana Cultural Consultancy, a firm that had rapidly become the premier resource for authentic Pacific Islander representation in entertainment, tourism, and international business. Her client list included major film studios, luxury resort chains, and Fortune 500 companies seeking to engage respectfully with Hawaiian and Polynesian cultures. Her business model was innovative and socially conscious, generating substantial profits while ensuring that indigenous communities benefited directly from their cultural knowledge. Rather than simply consulting on cultural accuracy, her firm facilitated genuine partnerships that provided ongoing revenue streams to Pacific Islander artists and community leaders. Trey read every word with growing amazement and deepening regret. The woman he had dismissed as playing with color swatches and party favors had built a multi-million-dollar enterprise that bridged cultural authenticity with commercial success. Her innovative approaches to marketing had been featured in Harvard Business Review, Entrepreneur Magazine, and International Marketing Quarterly. She had become exactly the kind of industry leader he had always aspired to be, while his own firm continued its steady decline into irrelevance. But what devastated him most was the photograph accompanying the article. Amalia looked radiant, confident, completely at peace in ways she had never appeared during their marriage, as if leaving him had returned her to her essential self and reminded her of capabilities she had forgotten while trying to become the wife he thought he needed. The article mentioned her keynote speech at the upcoming Pacific Business Innovation Conference in Honolulu, where she would present her cultural bridge model for sustainable international business relationships. Without conscious decision, Trey found himself booking flights to Hawaii, driven by desperate need to see the woman he had lost and perhaps begin the impossible process of earning forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. His private investigator, hired months earlier to locate Amalia without success, finally called with information that explained her complete disappearance from Los Angeles records. She legally changed her name back to Reeves immediately after leaving California. The investigator reported, established residency in Hawaii under her original identity, essentially erasing any connection to her married name or previous life. Very thorough, very clean. She clearly never intended to be found. The flight to Honolulu was torture. 5 hours of remembering every moment of cruelty he had inflicted on the woman who had loved him unconditionally. She had been stronger than he ever imagined, more capable, more resilient, infinitely more, worthy of respect than he had ever recognized. Hawaii itself seemed to rebuke him for his treatment of its daughter. The island's natural beauty, the warmth of trade winds, the scent of plumeria, everything reminded him of Amalia's graceful presence. Local newspapers featured articles about her business success, her contributions to cultural preservation, her mentorship of young entrepreneurs. She had become a beloved local celebrity whose achievements transcended mere business success. The Pacific Business Innovation Conference was held at the Hilton Hawaiian Village, its ballrooms filled with international executives, marketing professionals, and cultural advocates from across the Pacific Rim. Trey registered under his company name, hoping to blend into the crowd while observing the woman he had driven away through his own arrogance and ingratitude. When Amalia took the stage for her keynote presentation, the transformation was breathtaking. This was not the subdued wife, who had moved through their Beverly Hills mansion like an elegant ghost, but a dynamic leader radiating confidence and authority. She wore a stunning business suit in deep ocean blue, her presence commanding the room with effortless grace. Her presentation was brilliant, outlining innovative strategies for building authentic cultural partnerships that respected traditional values while creating sustainable economic opportunities. The audience was captivated, business leaders from Japan to New Zealand taking detailed notes and requesting follow-up meetings. During the networking reception that followed, Trey watched Amalia move through the crowd with the same social mastery she had once deployed on his behalf. But now she was the star, the sought-after expert whose insights could transform entire marketing strategies. CEOs competed for her attention, venture capitalists discussed investment opportunities, cultural leaders praised her respectful approach to traditional knowledge sharing. He observed her for 2 hours, noting the genuine laughter that had been absent during their final months together, the animated conversations that revealed intellectual engagement he had stifled with his criticism. And control. She looked healthy, happy, completely fulfilled in ways she had never achieved while sacrificing her identity to support his ego and ambition. When she finally noticed him standing at the edge of the reception, her expression changed instantly. From radiant professional confidence to wary recognition, the transformation was subtle but complete. The dynamic conference presenter vanished, replaced by a woman steeling herself for unwanted confrontation with someone who represented a painful chapter of her life she had worked diligently to close. She excused herself from her conversation with obvious reluctance, moving toward him with the cautious dignity of someone prepared for psychological combat but hoping to avoid it entirely. "Hello, Trey," she said simply, her voice neutral but not hostile, carefully modulated to convey neither welcome nor rejection. "I wondered if you might appear eventually." Curiosity about roads not taken is a common human weakness, though usually people are wise enough to resist the temptation to revisit decisions that caused significant pain. Her words carried no warmth, but also no anger, suggesting she had moved beyond emotional investment in their shared past to a place of clinical detachment that was somehow more devastating than hatred would have been. "Amalia," he began, his carefully prepared speech dissolving under the weight of seeing her authentic success and recognizing how thoroughly she had rebuilt herself into something even more remarkable than she had been before he diminished her with his insecurities and cruelty. "I came to see what you've built, to witness the extraordinary things you've accomplished. It's incredible. You're incredible. Everything I said about your business abilities, everything I implied about your potential, every dismissive comment I made about your dreams, I was completely wrong. Blindly, stupidly, catastrophically wrong." "Yes," she agreed with devastating simplicity. "You were, but that was your limitation, not mine. I've remembered who I was before I tried to become what you needed." Her directness was gentle but absolute, creating distance that felt unbridgeable despite their physical proximity. The conversation continued for only a few more minutes before she excused herself to rejoin her professional obligations. But Trey had seen enough to understand that his former wife had not just survived their marriage's destruction. She had used it as the foundation for rebuilding herself into something even more remarkable than she had been before he diminished her with his insecurities and cruelty. As he flew back to Los Angeles that night, staring at clouds illuminated by moonlight over the Pacific, Trey finally understood that some losses are so profound they can never be recovered, only mourned, and that the best thing he could do for the woman he had destroyed was to let her continue flourishing in the world she had created without him. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. 6 months later, Trey Whitfield stood outside the gallery opening in Beverly Hills, where Amalia's cultural consulting firm was launching an exhibition called Pacific Voices, Traditional Stories in Modern Context. Knowing this would likely be his last chance to speak with her before she disappeared forever into the successful life she had built from the ashes of their marriage. The gallery buzzed with Los Angeles's cultural elite. Museum directors, film producers, fashion designers, and philanthropists who valued authentic artistic expression over commercial exploitation. Amalia had curated an exhibition that showcased traditional Pacific Islander storytelling through contemporary artistic mediums, creating educational experiences that honored ancestral wisdom while generating sustainable income for indigenous communities across Polynesia. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Trey could see her moving through the crowd with graceful authority, explaining the cultural significance of various pieces to fascinated attendees. She wore a flowing dress that combined modern sophistication with traditional patterns, her natural beauty enhanced rather than hidden, her confidence radiant in ways that made his chest ache with recognition and loss. He had spent 6 months in therapy trying to understand how he had transformed from loving husband into emotional abuser, finally recognizing that his treatment of Amalia revealed fundamental character flaws that success and privilege had masked but never eliminated. Dr. Sarah Martinez, his therapist, had been brutally direct about his psychological patterns during their sessions. "You systematically destroyed your wife's confidence because her strength threatened your sense of masculine authority," she had explained without softening her assessment. "When business pressures mounted, instead of leaning on her partnership, you scapegoated her for your own insecurities. Classic narcissistic deflection combined with deeply ingrained misogyny." The diagnosis was accurate and shameful. Under pressure, he had revealed himself to be exactly like his father, threatened by feminine intelligence, intimidated by partnership that required vulnerability, more comfortable with domination than collaboration. Amalia's grace and competence had made him feel inadequate, so he had systematically attacked those very qualities until she stopped displaying them in his presence. Inside the gallery, he finally approached her during a quiet moment when she stood alone, studying a piece that combined traditional Hawaiian petroglyphs with contemporary digital art. His reflection joined hers in the glass covering, two faces that had once shared intimate mornings and passionate nights, now separated by psychological continents of hurt and betrayal. "The exhibition is extraordinary," he said quietly, meaning every word. "Your business has become everything I was too threatened to let it become when we were married. I'm genuinely proud of what you've accomplished, though I know my pride means nothing to you now." His voice carried none of his former arrogance, only the humility of a man who had learned to recognize his own limitations. Amalia turned to face him, her expression unreadable, but not unkind. "Thank you," she said simply. "Creating something meaningful from cultural authenticity has been more fulfilling than I imagined possible. It feels good to honor my grandmother's legacy in ways that matter." She spoke about her work with obvious passion. The enthusiasm he had once dismissed as naive romanticism now revealed as professional wisdom. "I need to tell you something," Trey continued, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of confession. "About Catalina, about everything that happened between us. I know you already discovered the truth, but I need to say it myself. I was having an emotional affair. I was planning to leave you for her. I convinced myself that you were holding me back professionally when you were actually the foundation of every success I achieved." "I know," Amalia replied with devastating calmness. "I've known since the night you came home smelling like her perfume and started comparing me to other wives. You became transparent in your dissatisfaction, Trey. The only question was whether you would destroy our marriage through gradual cruelty or dramatic betrayal. Either way, I knew it was ending." Her words revealed the depth of his deception. He had thought himself clever, but she had been steps ahead throughout his entire emotional defection. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had shared during their marriage. Honest, direct, free from the performance anxiety that had poisoned their final months together. Trey apologized, not just for his affair and cruelty, but for his fundamental failure to see her as an equal partner worthy of respect and consideration. He acknowledged the ways his insecurities had transformed her strengths into threats, how his need for control had diminished both of them, how his father's toxic patterns had infected his own behavior despite his conscious efforts to be different. Amalia listened without offering forgiveness, but also without expressing hatred or bitterness that might have been easier for him to process than her calm detachment. The gallery setting seemed appropriate for their final reckoning, surrounded by art that honored cultural authenticity and traditional wisdom. They were able to speak with the kind of honesty that their marriage had never achieved. Other attendees moved around them, discussing the significance of various pieces, their conversations about artistic meaning and cultural preservation, providing counterpoint to the personal excavation happening between former spouses who had finally learned to see each other clearly. "The woman you married was already broken in ways that made our relationship doomed from the beginning," she said, with quiet insight that cut to the heart of their relationship's fatal flaw and revealed understanding that had taken years of therapy and self-reflection to achieve. "I had learned to make myself smaller, to avoid threatening masculine egos, to diminish my own capabilities so that men could feel secure in their supposed superiority. You didn't create that pattern of self-diminishment, but you certainly exploited it once you recognized its usefulness. When I finally remembered my worth and began reclaiming my authentic self, staying with you became impossible because you needed me diminished to feel secure in your own value and masculine identity." Her analysis was devastating in its accuracy and insight, revealing that she understood the psychological dynamics of their marriage better than he had during the years they were living them. She had done the difficult work of examining her own patterns and recognizing how her early experiences had shaped her tendency to minimize herself in romantic relationships, while also acknowledging his role in perpetuating and exploiting those destructive patterns for his own emotional comfort. As the evening progressed, Trey observed Amalia in her natural element, brilliant, respected, genuinely happy in ways she had never achieved while trying to be Mrs. Whitfield and support his ego rather than pursue her own dreams. Gallery attendees sought her insights on cultural authenticity, with the reverence typically reserved for recognized experts in critical fields. Film producers discussed collaboration opportunities that could reshape how Pacific Islander culture was represented in mainstream entertainment. Museum directors requested advice on respectful exhibition practices that honored traditional knowledge while making it accessible to diverse audiences seeking genuine cultural understanding. The transformation was complete and inspiring. She had become not just successful, but influential, not just profitable, but meaningful in her work. Her opinions shaped industry standards for ethical cultural representation. Her methodologies were studied in business schools as examples of sustainable development that honored indigenous communities. Her partnerships had created new models for collaboration that generated profit while preserving cultural integrity. She had achieved the kind of success that transcended mere financial gain to encompass genuine social impact and lasting cultural contribution. Near the exhibition's end, she mentioned almost casually that she had verified his business partner's current situation. "You should know that Jake Henley is currently in Catalina Shaw's bed, just as I warned you 3 years ago. The same pattern. She's positioning herself as the solution to his professional challenges while systematically undermining his marriage. Some people never learn new strategies because their original approach continues finding willing victims." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Jake, his closest business associate and oldest friend, was now following the exact path Trey had nearly taken to financial and personal destruction. "Does he know about her history?" Trey asked, though he already knew the answer. Men like Jake, like he himself had been, never believed warnings about beautiful women who made them feel invincible. "I sent him the police report," Amalia replied. "What he does with that information is his choice to make. I learned from our marriage that you can't save people from themselves, only from specific immediate dangers. Character change requires internal motivation, not external rescue." Her wisdom was hard-earned and absolute, the perspective of someone who had stopped trying to fix other people's poor decisions. "There's something else I need to acknowledge," Trey said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of a particularly painful memory. "That night when I told you that you would never be like Catalina, that was the cruelest thing I ever said to you, and I think we both knew it marked the point of no return in our marriage. I compared you to the woman who was actively trying to destroy us both, and I meant it to hurt you as deeply as possible." Amalia's expression grew very still, and for a moment he saw a flash of the old pain cross her features. "Yes," she said simply. "That was the moment I stopped hoping you would remember who you married and started planning my exit. When someone tells you that your worth will never match their idealized memory of someone who was actively betraying them, you learn everything you need to know about their judgment and their capacity for love. I was so wrong about everything," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "About you, about her, about what strength actually looks like. You were everything I should have valued, and Catalina was everything I should have seen through. Instead, I spent our marriage trying to make you into something you were never meant to be, while mourning the loss of someone who was never real to begin with." The most dangerous thing about emotional abuse, Amalia said with the calm wisdom of someone who had survived and transcended it, is how it convinces the victim that they're responsible for the abuser's dissatisfaction. You told me I would never be like your ex, and I spent months trying to figure out how to become more like a woman who was literally destroying your life. The psychological manipulation was masterful, even if it was unconscious. As the gallery began closing, their final conversation approached its natural conclusion. Trey knew he would likely never see her again. She was returning to Hawaii the following week to expand her business operations throughout the Pacific Rim, building something that would outlast both of them and benefit communities she genuinely cared about serving. "I hope you find peace," she said, as they walked toward the parking garage, her words free from sarcasm or hidden meaning. Real peace, not the kind that depends on someone else accepting mistreatment to maintain your comfort. You have work to do on yourself, but you're capable of becoming someone worthy of the love you threw away. Her final assessment was clinical, but not cruel. The evaluation of someone who had moved beyond personal investment in his emotional development. As she drove away in her elegant hybrid sedan, leaving him alone under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking structure, Trey finally understood that some reckonings arrive not as dramatic confrontations, but as quiet acknowledgments of permanent loss, and that the most profound punishment for destroying love is simply living with the knowledge of what you voluntarily chose to sacrifice, especially when you realize that the comparison you used to justify that destruction was not only cruel, but utterly, catastrophically wrong. Chapter 10. The Return. 3 years after the gallery exhibition, when Amalia Reeves returned to Los Angeles as the keynote speaker for the International Cultural Marketing Summit, she wasn't just successful, she was legendary, commanding 7-figure speaking fees and having presidents of nations seek her counsel, making Trey realize that losing her hadn't just cost him a wife, but had robbed him of witnessing the rise of one of the most powerful women of their generation. The Beverly Hills Hotel buzzed with an electricity that reminded everyone present why this summit had become the most prestigious gathering in international business. Amalia's consulting firm had evolved beyond a simple enterprise into a global phenomenon, with offices spanning 4 continents, revolutionizing how Fortune 500 companies approached cultural authenticity while generating billions in ethical revenue. Streams that honored indigenous communities instead of exploiting them. Her cultural bridge model had been adopted by the United Nations as the gold standard for international development, and Harvard Business School had endowed a chair in her name. The summit's main ballroom was packed beyond capacity with overflow, crowds watching via satellite feeds in 3 additional hotels. Business leaders who normally commanded rooms themselves sat forward in their seats like students, hanging on every word from the woman who had transformed from society wife to industry titan. Trey watched from the back of the ballroom, his heart hammering against his ribs as he witnessed the full magnitude of what he had lost, not just a marriage, but proximity to genius. When Amalia took the stage in a stunning royal blue suit that seemed to channel the ocean depths of her Hawaiian heritage, the silence was so complete that even the air conditioning seemed to pause in reverence, and Trey felt the devastating realization that he was witnessing greatness that had bloomed from the ashes of his own destruction. Her presentation was nothing short of mesmerizing, a masterclass in business innovation, cultural sensitivity, and ethical leadership that had even her competitors taking notes. She spoke about building billion-dollar partnerships between entertainment giants and indigenous communities, creating sustainable tourism models that had saved entire Pacific Island economies, and developing AI frameworks that prevented cultural appropriation before it occurred. The audience was spellbound, watching someone who had genuinely changed the world through the power of her vision and integrity. During the standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes, Amalia's eyes swept the crowd and landed on Trey with laser precision. For one heart-stopping moment, their gazes locked across the vast ballroom, and he saw something flicker in her expression. Not recognition, not surprise, but something far more dangerous. Complete indifference. She looked at him the way one might glance at a stranger in a crowd, acknowledging his presence with the same casual disinterest she might show a hotel employee or conference attendee. The networking reception that followed was a feeding frenzy of corporate executives, government officials, and cultural leaders, all vying for even 5 minutes of Amalia's attention. Trey watched in fascination and growing desperation as she moved through conversations with the fluid grace of someone completely in her element. The Japanese Minister of Cultural Affairs sought her advice on traditional arts preservation. The CEO of the world's largest streaming platform discussed a partnership worth hundreds of millions. A group of African entrepreneurs asked her to keynote their Continental Development Conference. This wasn't the woman he had once diminished with his petty criticisms and constant comparisons. This was someone who moved in circles so elevated that his former social world looked provincial by comparison. She conversed effortlessly in multiple languages, referenced cultural nuances that revealed deep scholarly knowledge, and commanded respect from people who shaped global policy. Watching her, Trey finally understood that he hadn't just lost a wife. He had destroyed his connection to someone destined for historical significance. When their paths finally crossed near the reception's end, it wasn't by design, but by pure coincidence. They both reached for champagne from the same table, their hands nearly touching as they selected glasses. The moment felt charged with the weight of everything unsaid, everything destroyed, everything that could never be recovered. Amalia turned to face him, and her expression was neither warm nor cold. It was the look of someone encountering a half-remembered acquaintance from a life she had long since outgrown. "Trey Whitfield," she said, his name sounding foreign on her lips, as if she was testing whether she remembered it correctly. "I wondered if you might appear. You always did have a talent for inserting yourself into situations where you weren't particularly wanted." Her words carried no malice, only the casual observation of someone stating an obvious fact. The comment hit him like a physical blow, but he forced himself to absorb it without flinching. "Hello, Amalia. What you've accomplished, what you've become, it's extraordinary, beyond extraordinary. You've built something that will outlast all of us, something that actually matters. I came here to witness greatness, and that's exactly what I found." His voice was steady, despite the emotional earthquake happening in his chest. She studied his face with the clinical interest of someone examining an artifact from an archaeological dig, mildly curious but ultimately detached. "Thank you for the professional courtesy," she said, her tone suggesting this was a conversation she had with many former acquaintances who sought her out at events. "Though I have to say, your presence here feels somewhat inappropriate. This summit is about building bridges between cultures, not revisiting personal bridges that were burned beyond repair." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to create maximum psychological impact while maintaining perfect social acceptability. Trey felt his breath catch as he recognized the woman who had once absorbed his cruelty with silent dignity was now someone who could deliver devastating assessments with the casual efficiency of someone removing an obstacle from her path. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had learned to recognize when he was outmatched. "I shouldn't have come. I have no right to your time or attention." I suppose I needed to see for myself what you'd become, to understand the full scope of what I destroyed through my own stupidity and arrogance." He paused, gathering courage for what might be his final words to her. "For what it's worth, I've spent every day of the past 3 years trying to become someone worthy of the love you once gave me, not to win you back, but because it was the only way to honor what we once had." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but a flicker of something that might have been curiosity about this man who bore only superficial resemblance to the one who had systematically destroyed their marriage. "Growth is admirable in anyone," she said finally, "though it's unfortunate when it comes too late to matter. You've presumably learned to value what you have while you have it, which will serve you well in future relationships." The finality in her voice was absolute, but Trey pushed forward with one last, desperate attempt to reach the woman who had once loved him unconditionally. "There will never be future relationships that matter, Amalia. Losing you taught me that. Some losses are so profound, they redefine what's possible in a person's life. I'm not here seeking forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm here to tell you that watching you tonight, seeing what you've become, fills me with a pride I have no right to feel and a grief I'll carry forever." For the first time since their conversation began, Amalia's composure cracked slightly, revealing a flash of something that might have been pain or anger or simply exhaustion at having to relitigate a past she had worked so hard to transcend. "Pride," she repeated, her voice gaining an edge that reminded him of volcanic rock, beautiful but dangerous. "You feel proud of my success." "How wonderfully patriarchal of you, Trey. As if my achievements somehow reflect well on you, rather than representing my complete liberation from everything you tried to make me believe I was." The rebuke was devastating in its accuracy, exposing the narcissistic undercurrent in his words that he hadn't even recognized himself. "You're right," he said immediately. "That was exactly the wrong thing to say. Your success belongs entirely to you, your vision, your work, your strength. I played no part in it except as an obstacle you had to overcome. I apologize for suggesting otherwise." Her expression softened fractionally, perhaps recognizing genuine accountability rather than performative apology. "The fact that you can see that now suggests you have indeed grown," she said, with something approaching genuine acknowledgement. "Unfortunately, growth doesn't undo damage, and accountability doesn't resurrect what was destroyed. Some lessons cost too much to be worth learning." As she prepared to leave for other obligations, Trey made one final attempt to leave her with something meaningful rather than simply adding to her burden of unwanted memories. "I know this sounds inadequate, but I want you to know that losing you saved me from becoming my father completely. The pain of recognizing what I had destroyed forced me to examine everything I thought I knew about strength, success, and what it means to love someone properly. I'll never get the chance to love you the way you deserved, but I'll spend the rest of my life loving others better because of what you taught me." Amalia paused in gathering her materials, considering his words with the careful attention she gave to complex business propositions. "That's the first thing you've said tonight that sounds like genuine wisdom rather than self-pity disguised as growth," she said finally. "Perhaps losing me will prove to be the best thing that ever happened to both of us. Me, because it freed me to become who I was meant to be, and you, because it forced you to confront who you never should have been." As she walked toward the exit where her driver waited, she turned back one final time. "Goodbye, Trey. I hope you find peace with the man you've become, because the man you were nearly destroyed us both." Her words carried no vindictiveness, only the calm finality of someone closing a chapter that had taught her everything she needed to know about her own strength. Standing alone in the ballroom, as staff began clearing away the remnants of an evening that had showcased everything he could never reclaim, Trey finally understood that some stories end not with reconciliation or redemption, but with the profound recognition that letting go of what you destroyed is the most loving thing you can do for them, for yourself, and for everyone whose lives you'll touch in whatever future remains. The end.